One of the doctors in the article that I read from my readings, kind of researching on different things going on in our world today, is a quote about how the messages to the brain can get interrupted, they can get changed, they can even be broken. It seems that, according to this doctor, that in terms of the sense of smell or in the sense of taste, it's going to revert to some sort of default perception, and it appears that the default perceptions are generally negative ones. That's interesting. She said, if you think of it in evolutionary terms, if you have impaired sense of smell, it's safer to err on the side of something smelling dangerous. And again, not to take this metaphor or this kind of article and find more in it than actually is valuable for our thoughts today, but I thought it is truly amazing how easy it is and how there's this tendency in us to revert to danger, to revert to some negativity, to actually see disconnection in some of the things in our lives that used to inspire us and connect us to God, to love, to our neighbor, to the needs in the world around us, and reminding us of the strengths and the gifts and the abilities, creativity that we all have in us, that Jesus puts in us as we seek to be in this time, as Peter wrote, preparing and waiting for the day of the Lord. So restoring those connections and restoring those essential sensibilities is something that is a challenge for us. This would be the year, in fact, to really let the sounds of Christmas carols remind us of the good news, to let the smells of the season, to restore in us just that innate sense of what the season really is all about, or the sights, the colors, the twinkling, the warm lights, as we heard in the Advent candle lighting, to just bring back to our minds the most precious parts of this story, this narrative of God coming near to us. In God someday, there will be a place where righteousness feels at home. The word for that is hope. Hope is made real during this time while we wait for new heavens and new earth by living a life that is just and peaceful and working towards that justice and peace. For example, to not be afraid in interactions and conversations, whether it's texting or actual live conversations, to call out racism when we see it or hear it, and examine our own hearts to see what kind of bigotry remains there. To see that the poor and the sick and the child and the elderly and the homeless, the immigrant and the refugees, that they're all respected, afforded dignity, such an important word in our life, that we wish so much to be shown dignity. And one of the best ways to experience that is to show dignity in all other persons, just as Jesus respected others. To listen to the stories of abuse perpetrated by those in power, and to attempt to ensure that such abuses end, systemic or incidents. We look for those whose rights are truncated because of who they may be, and we can change those laws at local, state, and federal levels in order to establish and protect those rights. I mention these very practical things because as Peter wrote in that letter to those beleaguered Christians, use this time to actually make kingdom thoughts and kingdom expectations and hopes come alive, lest you feel a disconnect from where God is and what God is doing. Waiting for the day of the Lord, it takes great patience. In the meantime, like Mary, we can say, I am expecting. In the meantime, like the disciples and like the saints of old and the saints of today and the saints that you are, we have lots of good work, grace-saturated work to keep us occupied until God's future is realized. So just in a closing word, yes, it's 2020, but yet he comes. He is here. He is safe. He is sure. And I and you don't need to be afraid. Because as much as we may feel hurt, he is healer. Because if I shatter into millions of pieces, he will gently put me back together. In this pain, we will be changed. We won't be exactly the same as before, but we will be more like him. For as he puts me back and us back together, we learn more of who he is. Learn more of his love. I see and you see with restored sense and sensibility the utter worthiness of who he is. By itself, 2020, wow. But 2020 with Jesus, Comforter, Restorer, it makes me think of the Charles Dickens beginning of his novel, The Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. I trust the sovereignty of God. I trust in the advent of Jesus to turn the insanity of the nations to serve his purpose. And let it begin with